Very welcome to this online discussion. The first one that we have is as the journal Scientia Militaria. So please allow me to extend a warm word of welcome to our guests, Mr. Eeben Barlow, Professor Hussein Solomon, and Dr. Edward Mienie, whom Dr. Reutener on my left, the moderator for today, will shortly introduce formally. Now to our online guests, welcome, and I do hope that this discussion will resonate and evoke a sense of appreciation of the craft of intelligence and the importance of the human denominator in this context. May I ask that you kindly switch off your cameras and mute your microphones to allow a smooth flow of discussions, and if you don't do so, then we will do it for you. Nevertheless, please feel free to pose your questions online to the panel members. And then just to quickly talk through the sequence of events that will follow, Dr. Reutener will open the session with a formal introduction of the panel members, whereafter he will introduce the session for today. Thereafter, Mr. Barlow will present his perspective on what inspired him to write the book, Human Intelligence Supporting Composite Operations. This will then be followed by a discussion of the book by Prof Solomon, who wrote a book review of this book for Scientia Militaria. Thereafter, Dr. Mienie will then provide a specialized take on the significance of the book and the relevance of HUMINT in the African context. Thereafter, the panel will have an open discussion on the book itself before the floor will be open to discuss posted online questions. I hope that you will enjoy the session, and thank you very much for everybody that is participating tonight. Dr. Reutener.
Thank you, Professor Kleynhans. Appreciate that. Human intelligence supporting composite operations in Africa. Mr. Barlow, Eeben Barlow served as a commandant, a lieutenant colonel, and later a temporary colonel in several conventional, unconventional, and covert South African Defence Force operations units. He commissioned in the SADF's Corps of Engineers. He served as a sapper, commander with the 101 Task Force, as well as the 53rd and 54th Infantry Battalions. He went on to become the second in command of 3 Battalion's Reconnaissance Wing and was the first commander of Papa Troop 44 Parachute Brigade, while attached to the 2nd Field Regiment and later the South African Army Headquarters at the Directorate of Engineers. During this period, he also was an active member of the SADF's Explosive Ordnance or Improvised Explosive Devices Bomb Disposal Teams. Mr. Barlow developed the SADF Special Forces training programs in agent handling and covert operations and trained and mentored these members. He was the founder and chairperson of Executive Outcomes, a private military company. Upon leaving Executive Outcomes in 1996, he served as a political and defense/security advisor to numerous African governments. Mr. Barlow has partaken in numerous conflicts and wars across the continent, where he has been described by many as one of Africa's true warrior sons, a soldier, a scholar, and a diplomat, yet unafraid to speak truth to power. He has served as a Major General in several African armed forces and as a political and military advisor, military campaign strategist, and commander of several newly created, highly successful combat units. He has also overseen the training of specialist combat forces and accompanied them in battle. Additionally, he assisted several under-siege African governments with the development and implementation of sustainable military and intelligence strategies, very pertinent to our discussions tonight, and doctrines and policies to assist and guide and reduce uncertainties while gaining national and military advantages. Admired and respected by numerous African governments, he has also gained a grudging admiration and respect by the adversaries of those governments. He has contributed to numerous academic papers and book chapters and is a regular speaker at foreign conferences and seminars. Additionally, he frequently lectures at military colleges and universities across Africa and abroad and remains a trusted advisor to several African governments and military and political leaders. He is the author of 4 highly acclaimed books: Executive Outcomes Against All Odds, Composite Warfare, the Conduct of Successful Ground Force Operations in Africa, The War for Africa, Conflict, Crime, Corruption and Foreign Interests, and then tonight's book, A Human Intelligence Supporting Composite Operations, Warfare Operations in Africa. He is currently the chairman of and CEO of Executive Outcomes, which was reactivated in 2020 on the request of several African governments. Mr. Barlow, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Is the floor mine?
Not yet, sir. I'll just introduce Professor Solomon quickly. Professor Solomon holds a doctorate in political science from the University of South Africa. Dr. Solomon is Senior Professor at the Center for Gender and Africa Studies at the University of the Free State and a visiting professor in the Department of Political Science, the Faculty of Military Science, Stellenbosch University. He specializes on terrorism and the African continent. He is a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He is also a member of the International Political Science Association, the Canadian Political Science Association, and the South African Association of Political Science. Until February 2021, he was also convener of the National Research Foundation's Philosophy and Political Science Subject Specialist Rating Group. Dr. Solomon is also chair of the Faculty of Humanities Research Committee at the University of the Free State. His research interests include conflict and conflict resolution in Africa, South African foreign policy, international relations theory, religious fundamentalism and population movements within the developing world. His publications have appeared in South Africa, Nigeria, the United States, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, the Russian Federation, Greece, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Egypt, Ethiopia, Israel, Lebanon, India, Bangladesh, Spain, and Japan. In other words, globally. His most recent books include African Security in the Anthropocene, The Future of War in Africa, with our guest Eeben Barlow, Intersectionality and LGBTQI Rights, a comparative analysis of Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, Directions in International Terrorism, Theories, Trends, and Trajectories, and Terrorism in Africa, New Trends and Frontiers. These are just some of the latest books flowing from Dr. Solomon's pen. Dr. Solomon, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And then lastly but not least, Dr. Edward Mienie. Dr. Mienie is the Executive Director and Professor of Strategic and Security Studies in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs at the University of North Georgia. Dr. Mienie has more than 25 years of experience working in international relations and business, media relations, and coalition building. He earned a bachelor's degree in law from the University of South Africa and received his doctorate in international conflict management while teaching and leading the academic exchange program with South Africa at Kennesaw State University. He served as in the Diplomatic Corps of South Africa from 1987 to 1998, including 4 years as Deputy Ambassador to Switzerland, 4 years as the Political Advisor to the Ambassador, and U.S. Government and Congressional Liaison, Washington, D.C., between 1989 and 1992. Dr. Mienie is also a veteran of the South African Defence Force, having served 4 years active duty during the Angolan War in the early 80s. His research interests include state fragility, national intelligence, the role of public diplomacy in conflict management, and nuclear non-proliferation. Dr. Mienie is also widely publicized with peer-reviewed books including United States Higher Education and National Security, Implications of the COVID-19 Pandemic on National Security, Soldier Leaders in the Age of AI, The Future of Pre-Commissioning Education, Security Governance, and State Fragility in South Africa, and also Private Military Security Companies' Influence on International Security and Foreign Policy. Dr. Mienie, welcome to our discussion panel tonight.
Thank you.
Let me just give a brief introduction on our panel, on the context of what we are discussing tonight. And then I will hand over to Mr. Barlow to open the floor. Again, welcome to this online discussion, which is focused on the critical role of human intelligence, HUMINT, in supporting composite warfare operations in Africa. We are at a juncture where advancements in artificial intelligence are reshaping the landscape of modern warfare. However, it is imperative to underscore that despite these advancements, HUMINT remains the linchpin in the successful execution of composite warfare operations, especially in the African context. It is essential to recognize that the human element of intelligence cannot be replaced or overshadowed by technical or technological advancements. AI, undoubtedly a transformative force in modern warfare, can augment decision-making, data analysis, and even predict certain events. Yet, its true potential is realized when it collaborates with, rather than replaces, human intelligence. In the context of Africa, a continent often grappling with complex socio-political and economic challenges, the value of HUMINT cannot be overstated. Understating the intricate web of diverse cultures, languages, histories, and contexts that shape the African landscape requires human expertise, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to decipher nuanced information. HUMINT provides that critical understanding, giving life to raw data and transforming it into actionable intelligence. Composite warfare operations, which involve a combination of military, political, economic, and informational strategies, require a comprehensive understanding of the environment in which they unfold. This understanding gives context to what HUMINT offers. The ability to grasp the motivations, networks, and behaviors of different actors, be they state or non-state, is fundamental to creating effective composite strategies. As we delve deeper into this discussion, let us explore the value of HUMINT in supporting composite warfare operations in Africa. Thank you very much. Mr. Barlow, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Good evening, everyone. And for those who live in other time zones, good morning or good afternoon. I think I should start off by thanking the editorial team of Scientia Militaria, the South African Journal of Military Studies, as well as the Faculty of Military Science, Stellenbosch University, for hosting this online discussion. I'm greatly honored, so thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the host, Dr. Evert Kleynhans, the moderator, Dr. Marcel Reutener, the book reviewer, Professor Hussein Solomon, the writer of the foreword, Dr. Eeben Mienie, for giving up your time to actually oversee and make sure that everything goes smoothly and that I stay on track. And then I don't know if Henri is still doing the panel support, but if she is, thanks very much to her. I'm actually in very esteemed company. I'd also like to thank everyone who joined the panel online. But very much I'd like to express my gratitude to African intelligence officers past and present that read the manuscript prior to publication and gave me their inputs, and some after I'd actually written the book. So thank you very much to them. And then finally, my editor, Chris Cox, and my publisher, 30 Degrees South, for giving me this opportunity to put the book out there. And I think many people who've published works in the end look at it and think, you know, we could have done much better with it, with what we've ended up publishing as a book. And this book is no exception. And it's always problematic, I think, for many people writing a book. When have you written enough and when are you overwriting? And once again, that's where the editor comes in, and he usually tells me I'm really starting to waffle now and get back to the point. But Africa needs to start somewhere, so I hope that this can provide a very good starting point. Just in terms of criticism and debate, I know that this is always healthy, especially from people who've worked and achieved success in a particular field. So for that reason, I asked past and present intelligence officers to review the book prior to publication. And then I must finally mention that it was written to serve as a textbook, and it's not an academic treatise on human intelligence. And in order to be a textbook that people can read and hopefully learn and enjoy while they're doing it, it was written in very plain English, and I say that not in any disrespect, but many of our colleagues up north, English is not their first language. So I hope all in all that aim was achieved. And it's very difficult to speak sort of in glowing terms of one's own writings. And where does one start? And I guess starting at the beginning is the very best place. The book was written to be a companion book to my book, which was titled Composite Warfare. And that book was published in 2016. It's currently being revised and hopefully will come out next year. But it's a daunting task. But I had to write the book on human intelligence to complement the book because many African armies currently rely on foreign power intelligence. And that intelligence is only shared when it doesn't impact on the foreign power's interests. Now that doesn't make it good or bad, as it depends on whose interests and what interests are best being served. But I believe that Africans must take control over their own intelligence operations, because without that they cannot develop realistic and sustainable national military or campaign strategies, because those are driven by intelligence. And then of course strategy determines the structure. In other words, the order of battle and the tables of organization and equipment, and not vice versa. But this lack of intelligence has resulted in a disconnect between numerous campaigns and operations where poor, irrelevant, agenda-driven or outdated intelligence has been used by incorrect force structures. And the ultimate end is failure, or at very best, only partial success. And we're not in the business of getting partial success. We either need to succeed because there is no prize for second place. But this lack of intelligence has resulted in many armies and governments supposedly being caught by surprise. And as far as I'm concerned, that's totally unacceptable, because every event that happens has indicators that manifest themselves long before the event. So that creates this problem that there's an intelligence deficit. Intelligence is given to them by a foreign partner, which is really there to drive that partner's agenda. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but the ultimate situation that government ends up in, the intelligence does not match what's actually happening on the ground. So back to the title, Human Intelligence Supporting Composite Warfare Operations in Africa. And many officers and NCOs have asked me, what exactly is composite warfare? And Dr. Reutener gave a very good description of it. I define it as an intelligence-driven whole-of-government approach that integrates multiple domains of warfare, such as land, air, sea, riverine, intelligence, information, and cyberspace, all aimed at protecting the sovereignty of the state, its territoriality, and in particular, the pillars of state. And in order to achieve a desired national outcome. And this is applicable to all offensive, defensive, and containment operations, whether it be so-called terrorism, a conventional onslaught, or whatever. Composite warfare has been used as a successful guide to conflict and war by several African armies, and it's proven its worth in conflicts. But it makes mention of actionable human intelligence. And this is really where it all came from, because I was asked, how do we get actionable human intelligence? There's intelligence, and there's intelligence that becomes historic in nature, and then there's intelligence that enables us to act rapidly and preemptively. And the armed forces of governments need to act rapidly and preemptively. And without human intelligence, and rather actionable intelligence, they're unable to do that. And after all, Sun Tzu reminded us that intelligence is the key to war. Without it, we cannot win. And he underscored the importance and the value of it more than 2,000 years ago. But intelligence that is not actionable becomes history. And we cannot base preemptive actions on history, although history can guide us on predictions and likely enemy reactions. So despite all the new developments in intelligence collection, such as AI, cyber, UAVs, infrared and thermal sensors, etc., the human agent still plays a critical role, because knowing where the enemy is of course important. But if we know what the enemy commander is thinking and we know his intent, then we can devise ways in which to prevent his intent or to defeat him or to mislead him. So in order to discover his thoughts, we can intercept his radio and cellular communications, we can access his cyber tracks, but he can use those to deceive us. Or you can simply stop using those assets. And if that's all we rely on, we actually become lost. And this is where the human agent ought to be playing a critical role. But in looking at the human agent, we need to consider the incredible criticality and value of talent spotting. In other words, identifying the potential agent. Because we have to recruit the right person with the requisite access. And that's what HUMINT really hinges about, its access. Because once we have the access, we can actually get into the mind of the enemy. But in order to get this, to find the right person and to do our talent spotting, we need to have future-based planning and scheming. These things don't happen overnight. So often we have to cultivate an agent and guide an agent and almost manipulate him into a position where he can give us the requisite access we want. Recruiting agents in Africa is very unlike recruiting agents in Europe and elsewhere. And therefore, African officers are best suited to make this pitch. Because unless our covers are watertight, pale-faces, those of us who are of European extraction, will immediately attract suspicion. And that is one of the things that I find within our continent. Once we have trained our fellow African intelligence officers how to do it, they excel at it. And so therefore we should not look at recruiting agents and human intelligence through a European or a Western lens. We need to look at it through an African lens. In order to try and simplify matters, I looked at the recruitment cycle and what motivates agents to betray their countries or their organizations. Because it's a huge step. But how do we get someone to betray and still remain on the surface of it, still very loyal to his organization or his country? So unless we understand the motivations and we use those motivations as leverage and we exploit them, our recruitments will fail. And just by the way, people do not only work for financial incentives. There are many other incentives as well. But given the complex situation we find ourselves in on the continent, we also need to consider, do we recruit our agents under false flags? In other words, posing as intelligence officers of a different country, and that puts a whole new dynamic on it, because that implies a different language where we supposedly are, a different culture, a different tradition, a different religion, and that tells us that those people who we use to recruit agents and run agents, I refer to them as case officers. They need to be trained very, very well in order to sustain their cover stories. And then once we've recruited an agent, how do we manage and run him in a way that makes the agent feel good, that makes the agent want to please us? And that goes back to the motivations. How do we leverage these and exploit them to our benefit, but in such a way that he feels it's to his benefit? We also have to remember we have to train the agent so he doesn't betray himself by leaving a fingerprint of his deception. In other words, he must know how to bypass the counterintelligence traps and obstacles that are set up to catch people like himself. And how do we get him to do it in a manner that he does not act like an agent? Because oftentimes people will, once they've been recruited as an agent, they're unable to keep that very sensitive information to themselves, and they blurt it out to someone. And that compromises an entire operation. Communicating with agents and assets can be very problematic as a result of infrastructure challenges. And then, of course, we have language problems, culture problems, etc. So oftentimes, case officers and agents must resort to making use of cutouts and other support agents, as well as communicate through dead drops, brush contacts, moving drops, email drops, etc. Because we have to be able to keep a line of communication open with that agent regardless
Online, weiter okay.
We have everybody except for Eeben. It's his side, not your side, Saldana.
Yeah, we also in a stalemate here.
I think Eeben has a lag on his system.
Maybe we can just see if we can get Hussein on then.
Hussein, can you still hear us?
Yes, I'm here and available.
Okay, if we can, I think it's better if we can go on your side, Hussein.
Okay.
And we'll just look up with Eeben when he's available again.
Okay, that's fine.
Let me just briefly, after Eeben is now presented, it's difficult to explain the ease of reading of this book. It was written in such a way that you can immediately understand the context, the concepts, and what the author even has tried to convey. It's an easy read. So there are a lot of questions in terms of, there are so many questions that we would like to ask Eeben to explain, but not in the context of not being sure of what he presented in his book, because it's so fascinating. So with that, I will hand over to you, Professor Solomon. If you can just provide your take on the book, and then as soon as Eeben is on, and then we can continue from there.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
100%.
Okay, so I think this book has relevance to all intelligence and indeed security agencies. And topics such as understanding and the language of tradecraft, agent cultivation, recruitment, surveillance, counter-surveillance has relevance to all security agencies, as is the profound observations the author shares with readers, often from his own vast personal experiences. So I cannot imagine a better author to write this book. Barlow's vast operational experiences is clearly evident in the pages of this book, but importantly, Barlow approaches this with the detachment of a scholar. The chapters logically follow on each other, beginning with understanding the importance and role of intelligence, to human intelligence operations in Africa, to intelligence tradecraft, and finally intelligence in support of composite warfare operations. And as he himself just said, this volume builds on his previous work, his book Composite Warfare, the Conduct of Successful Ground Operations in Africa, and examines how African security agencies can more effectively, more efficiently structure and deploy their human intelligence resources and secure the African state at a time when it faces unprecedented internal and external challenges. The centrality of intelligence is made clear by the author at the very start of the book. Barlow writes, and I'm quoting him here, "Intelligence drives strategy. Without it, failure waits." And these two sentences symbolizes vintage Barlow. He is erudite, succinct, and powerful. Intelligence, the author stresses, is essential for preemptive action. Barlow powerfully demonstrates how African armed forces suffer as a result of a deficit of actionable intelligence to make strategic adjustments to high-tempo maneuver operations as well as low-intensity operations aimed at countering armed anti-government forces. Perhaps more perhaps more critically, as a result of a cumbersome bureaucracy, is the time lag from the collection of intelligence to its verification and interpretation, and then giving an actionable intelligence report to political decision makers. This time lag, Barlow argues, enables anti-government forces and other adversaries and challenges to plan and execute operations against governments, gain the initiative and propagate their successes, thereby undermining public confidence in the government. To increase the quality of intelligence products and to overcome the time lag, Barlow powerfully argues for a restructuring of intelligence services, taking into account how they are postured and how they can become more forward-looking, preemptive and action-oriented with a deeper operational reach. In Chapter 5, Barlow examines how such a revised African intelligence structure may look like in the form of a Focused Activities Division, or FAD. This would be an independent, highly classified, self-sustainable, deniable and low visibility structure. Such a structure would be responsible for the conduct of specialist offensive intelligence activities and operations of immediate concern to the Commander-in-Chief and or Chief of Intelligence. Its core function is to independently collect and act on critical intelligence information that poses an imminent and significant threat to the state and citizens. As all conflicts and wars are fought across the information domain, the impact and power of perception must never be underestimated. Its impact on altering and shaping public opinion is immense. For this reason, Barlow argues for the creation of a perception modification group within the FAD. This group, Barlow goes on to argue, would be responsible for specialist informational warfare, influence and propaganda operations aimed at altering, influencing, shaping and entrenching perceptions to the judicial's application of white, grey and black propaganda, disinformation and other forms of perception modification. Although frequently referred to as strategic messaging, it is aimed at either the strengthening or the erosion of the support of a government or an organization. It is clear from the foregoing that the envisaged FAD would be a hugely powerful organization. Whilst operationally appealing, the independence of such a division must come with some qualifiers, I believe. I believe here that Barlow should have added something about legislative oversight and exactly how independent should such a division be given the historical political abuse of such clandestine institutions on the African continent. Now, in fairness to Barlow, he's quite aware of such an abuse and he cogently argues, and here I'm quoting him, some governments, however, exploit their military and other intelligence collection agencies for their personal benefit and interest, creating an intelligence shortfall when faced with hostile challenges or threats. This misguided approach to intelligence impacts negatively on their domestic and foreign interests and their stability, unquote. This is all the more reason for greater clarity on the proposed divisions, independence and issues of oversight. In an age of tremendous strides in technology, big data, and artificial intelligence, Barlow refreshingly puts his emphasis on the role of humans as collectors of intelligence information. While signals, imagery, or geospatial intelligence may provide evidence of a military buildup, only human intelligence assets can unveil the intentions and motivations of such a military buildup. In this day and age of AI, we forget that things like intuition cannot be replaced, hence the importance of this book with its emphasis on human intelligence. Perhaps the most important aspect of this book is its focus on Africa. Barlow provides his deep insights on what makes the African operational environment unique and how intelligence structures can adapt to this fast-changing environment. Here, his chapter on 50 basic Africa rules is most insightful. I found the book incisive and erudite, and it speaks to the author's scholarship and deep command over a subject matter gleaned out of decades of operational experience. This book should be prescribed reading for any module in intelligence studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Solomon. I do appreciate it, and you are quite right. This book should be prescribed. And I've got a question for Eeben Barlow, but we can wait for it later on. But that has to do with the tenets of intelligence. and the principle of intelligence being centralized control, rightly so with the FAD construct, which is a mobile construct. Eeben, welcome again. I'm going to give the floor back to you now because we've been cut off just to finish your side of the statement.
Yeah, my great apologies. A technical glitch from our telecom service provider. So you have load shedding, we have telecom to contend with, so my apologies. I think I ended off where I spoke of, the different types of communication through dead drops, brush contacts, moving drops, email drops, etc. But I also believe we've been practicing intelligence too passively, and that we ought to become a lot more aggressive in our approaches to collecting intelligence information and then acting on that intelligence. And that brings me to what Professor Hussein discussed, the Focused Activities Division. And I must just say that this isn't a division in the sense that we know a division consisting of 2 or 3 brigades or whatever. It's just a name. I could have called it the Focused Activities Unit, but I thought FAD sounded better than FAU because that might be incorrectly interpreted. But it's a self-contained intelligence structure that conducts offensive intelligence operations such as espionage, clandestine reconnaissance, pseudo and special operations, direct action, discretionary warfare, perception modification, and that type of thing. Now, of course, there are those who would consider such a structure as being too powerful, and I think Professor Hussein touched on that. So I'm sorry I'm dragging you into my talk now, Prof. But this structure works according to a mandate. And that's one of the things we need to emphasize when it comes to African armies, that officers and NCOs and the regular soldiers must be politically astute but non-partisan. Because as soon as we have partisan people, I'm not talking of partisan groups in terms of partisan warfare, that's something different, but people who ascribe only to a political party and do not serve the state, we start developing these problems. So yes, there must be oversight, but that oversight is usually provided by, in this instance, it would be the division to which this group is attached, or the combat operations group, etc. But I really believe that when the sovereignty of our nation is at stake, when it comes to intelligence ethics, we must not allow that to hamper us. There's no prize for coming second in a conflict or a war. I also revisited our intelligence cycle, which many of our colleagues up north found a bit problematic. That was slightly modified, and I've renamed it the intelligence sequence, and that consists of certain steps: identify, what intelligence is required, analyze where would we find it, go through the normal intelligence appreciation, collect intelligence, process it, and then start predicting what's the enemy going to do, what's he likely to do, what are his reactions, how can we counter the reactions, etc. Disseminate that as an intelligence product and then act on it. And this need not be a lengthy process. It can actually be done very quickly, and it has been done very, very quickly, because the longer we wait, the more this actionable intelligence loses its value and becomes historical. So actionable intelligence must stay in our database anyway, because we need that when we start predicting things. I also felt the need to look at the different sources that we have for intelligence information, and I view all these assets and sources as the fuel that drives this great military intelligence machine, and actually creates this machine that constantly requires information coming in, intelligence coming in, and that could be from AI, from cyber intrusions, from ISR, or from UAVs or whatever. But that allows us to build up this database. But those sources remain critically important to us. And then, of course, we have directed, non-directed, and casual sources. But sources such as ground, aerial, space, our refugees, IDPs, prisoners of war, etc., and the local populations are all important sources of information. But some of them require specialist attention. And then I go back to the need for the Focused Activities Division. And to prepare this, we need to, apart from the structure, have a selection and vetting process, have a doctrine in place, have training in place. Certain specialist equipment's going to be needed. So these are all things we have to consider. And selection and vetting are critical to us because we need the right people with the correct mindset. And this is a very different mindset I discovered from that of being carrying a heavy weight on your back and a rifle. It's a very different way. It's a much more subtle way of actually fighting the war, although there are times when it becomes less subtle. But we need to prevent the enemy as well from recruiting our people, and that becomes a counterintelligence function. So counterintelligence has to ring fence everything we do. Looking at a doctrine for case officers or agent handlers, I came up with a doctrine which we've applied already and it works fairly well. Identify, in other words, identify through our talent spotting a potential agent. Engage that agent, in other words, start the process of cultivating him or doing a direct approach on him, depending what his motivations are. To collect that intelligence information, that must be assessed by our analysts. It gets disseminated as an intelligence product. It's then protected by the counterintelligence and counter-espionage divisions, sections, units, whatever you want to call them, and we need to act on it. So therefore, I covered quite a lot of tradecraft for case officers and agent handlers because they conduct espionage and other operations and they require a different approach. And they face challenges and situations combat soldiers don't face. So to me, the tradecraft is to the intelligence officer what fieldcraft is to combat soldiers. And then, of course, it was actually trying to put all of this human-derived intelligence, combat intelligence, into context with composite warfare operations. And how do we use that to develop the intelligence picture to help us to shape the battlefield? And then, of course, the FAD's input during both low and high intensity operations. So looking back at it, am I satisfied with the book? I think in general, yes, but I know as time passes, I'll get feedback from other African intelligence officers, and hopefully I'll be able to revisit it and improve on the book as it is. So for now, it must hopefully be viewed as a textbook and serve as a basis for both operations and debate. So thank you very much, Dr. Reutener, and I do apologize for my national fiber providers' incompetence at a critical juncture of my talk.
Mark, thank you very much for your discussion. It's appreciated. What I value, there are two things that I value based on what you've just mentioned, and that is what we need to revisit the process of intelligence. And it's that juncture between structure, process, the chicken or the egg situation, which is first and which need to be first. And then also the issue, rejoin the issue of what we refer to as the long-term intelligence cycle on the strategic level and the short-term intelligence cycle on the combat operational level. There seems to be sometimes a disjoint between these two, and that need to be revisited, and that is where you put the FAD into context. Linked to the FAD, what I also appreciate is the dual purpose or the dual role of the FAD in terms of normal composite warfare operations as well as low-intensity military and law enforcement operations, the dual purpose usage of the FAD itself. Thank you very much. I'm not going to hand over to Dr. Edward Mienie. You are available. I don't see you online now. There you are. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. I would like to underscore a lot of what my colleague Dr. Solomon had shared with us. What drew me to write the foreword is I've known Eeben, actually we met the very first time in 1981, and he was an invited guest. He was serving in the Angolan War at that time. He literally had the dust on his boots, on his combat boots, as he was invited as a guest to Air Force headquarters to speak to us during one of our intelligence courses that we were undergoing. And I've remained in touch with him over the years, followed him, especially when he launched Executive Outcomes the first time. He had a sparkling career in the SADF, in the former SADF, until, as he puts it, he became expendable. And I was honored as well to write a letter of support when he was invited to serve as the honorary consul general or consul of the Sao Tome Principe country, and I gladly did that. I recognize in Eeben, knowing him for, quite a number of decades now, to be a supreme diplomat, a warrior. Eeben understands the art and science of intelligence very, very well. I direct a bachelor's degree program, Strategic and Security Studies, here at the University of North Georgia. And within our 7 concentrations, I helped develop the intelligence concentration. So I have a vested interest in this discipline, and I read his book with a lot of interest. We all know that we live in a high-tech world, but this is never going to replace human intelligence as a critical piece of our intelligence collection, especially in Africa, and Eeben very nicely underscores the importance of human int for Africa. It's only human int in the main that can help determine the intent, as mentioned earlier by one of our speakers, the intent of our adversaries. Coming from Africa myself, I recognize, and so does the author very well, the challenging, complex, dynamic, unique nature of the African landscape, political and otherwise. And he recognizes human int as a force multiplier to help make informed decisions on the side of the commander in the field, on the side of policymakers, to reduce uncertainty. It's necessary to ensure a positive and sustainable national trajectory, and Eeben very nicely speaks to that. Human int is unique has a unique place in Africa, and he very nicely addresses the politicization, the danger of the politicization of intelligence. He highlights the importance of intelligence that has to remain apolitical. So the fact that Eeben speaks to that as an African, in a quest to help in the training of intelligence agents throughout Africa, is very important. He addresses intelligence as one of the pillars of state that sustains the integrity and stability of a state. This is very crucial. He addresses the countering of false narratives by outside forces, and that it's very important to verify and validate shared intelligence information coming from the outside. So in order to verify and validate, the intelligence officer needs the skills for that. And I think this book speaks to that very well. Foreign governments' interests and interference to effect regime change to secure their interests in resources, and we know rare earth minerals that Africa has. Identifying these efforts, it's imperative to take care of the interests of the African countries. So another key challenge that Eeben underscores is the threat to national security as it relates to economic aid. We are all familiar with loans that exploit and leverage African countries, some African countries. We're familiar with the Bretton Woods institutions and their structurally adjusted programs that can have a crippling effect on a nation-state's economy. Fragile states, non-state actors, transnational crime syndicates. It's important for the intelligence officer to help inform decision makers, give forewarning about fragility that could affect neighboring states, that could destabilize stable states having an unstable or a fragile state as a neighbor. Even with his knowledge, his cultural sensitivity that he has garnered over many, many years, not from reading books, but from actually experiencing it, he plows that into his book. How do you gain the trust when it comes to clandestine intel collection of guest villages, for instance? He has very good cross-cultural communications, as I know him as a person, and he has an understanding of Africa, it being complex and diverse. He values the essence of communicating clearly and respectfully. And if I could take you to a place in his book where he addresses very specifically the basics of good cross-cultural communication and understanding. Things we take for granted in the West. Don't be rushed. Leave the arrogance at home. These are important considerations when dealing with Africa. He addresses the Africa rules, which he developed off the Moscow rules used during the Cold War. And in the process addresses the tendency in some circles in the West to view Africa as a country. That kind of mentality, that myopic view of Africa. He addresses mirror imaging and how wrong it is, and how we should be aware that Africa is extremely diverse. So this drew and piqued my interest when Eeben first approached me and had me consider writing a foreword. I was delighted to do this. I think it's a very necessary book for the military in Africa, different countries, for their intelligence officers to study. It is practical, it's applicable, and it is written in a way that is easily digestible. So that is an overview from my side, Marcel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mienie. I've got a question for you, though, but we can leave it open for later on. You've touched on your take on the issue of foreign involvement. And my question to you later on, maybe if you can think on that so long, will be on how African nations, considering the geopolitical shifts, can, in a redefined environment, can structure their training and their collaboration to effectively collect actionable intelligence for national security strategies and operations. But that is from my side of how I approach that question. For our panelists, thank you very much. I'm now opening the floor so that you can have discussions. You can ask questions between yourselves, and then I will also then at the end ask a question or two. Maybe if you've got questions for Eeben, Dr. Mienie or Professor Solomon.
Hi there, could I maybe ask Mr. Barlow a question?
Yes, you are welcome, sir.
Yeah, the issue here is when you look at many of the regions, right, the threats are regional or there's international threats which impact on several countries. Where does the issue of intelligence sharing come into it? How much do you share with your partners? Remembering that, a friend today could very well be an adversary tomorrow. Thank you.
You've always got to ask these difficult questions, Prof. I think, first of all, if we take a country in Africa, it's surrounded by other countries. Over time, a certain amount of identification has been done in terms of a common threat. That common threat intelligence, and especially when it interlinks with transnational crime, I believe that should be shared. But of course, there are things that are not shared with them when it impacts on either our tactical, operational, or strategic situation. Then we don't share it. But we do encourage them to open liaison channels with neighboring intelligence services so that that backdoor channel exists if ever a political problem arises or a situation of tension arises. Because then it's easy for the intelligence officers having that backdoor to actually go and speak to them. So there's really a fine balance in terms of what do we share, what don't we share. Obviously, if our national interests are at stake, we're not going to disclose that willy-nilly to a regional state. But obviously, if there's a threat against their national interests and it could impact on us, I believe that sharing should be done. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks, it does.
Thank you very much. Professor Solomon, I've got a question from my side for you. If I can state like this, how does the exploitation of vulnerabilities within African governments and societies by foreign intelligence agencies affect the region's overall stability? And what measures can be taken to enhance awareness and counteract these operations to safeguard national interests and security?
It's a tough question. I should maybe say that I've never been in any operations and so on like Eeben. I'm just an academic. But I think one of the huge problems that you have, I mean, yes, you have foreign agencies and so on exploiting your vulnerabilities, and that's par for the course. That happens all the time. But I think that one of the major issues that you have is when your own country doesn't have a very clear national interest, and when you have people occupying key positions on the basis of of who they know and their political connections as opposed to their requisite skills, then that, I think, undermines capacity, and that has been the African problem. I mean, there's no sense of patriotism, etc. And I think that is the major problem. So you can put people through, in my view, through various training programs and stuff like that, but they have no sense of right and wrong. They have no sense of what's in the national interest. And I think that constitutes a major threat, even more than the foreign or adversaries, etc. Just by the way, I noticed there's been questions in the chat function for Eeben, I believe.
Yes, I've got them. I'm going to ask them now.
But could I just say something there as well? I think we all have to accept that given the way the international community has shaped itself and is shaping itself, there are going to be conflicting interests and there are going to be coinciding interests. And currently, whether Africa likes to believe it or not, it is going to become and is already a battleground between the superpowers, because this is all about resources. We all accept that intelligence agencies, and if I'm talking in particular about the military intelligence, have liaison people within embassies known as the defense attaches. But we also know in this time that Africa is in, where everyone is giving aid, they're not giving it because they love Africa. And I think we need to disabuse ourselves of that notion. They are giving it because there's something they want in return. And that which they want in return might not necessarily be overt. It could be covert as well. And I think that's where the danger lies. When we see all these NGOs and NPOs and do-gooders coming in. Who vets them? Are they ever put through a vetting process? I don't think they are, because there are thousands of them. There are currently more NGOs in Africa than what there were colonial administrators in the days of the colonies. I mean, that's actually bloody scary when you think about it. And who controls them? Who vets them? Who checks what they're doing? I've come across NGOs that have openly almost tried to convince local people to rise up against the government. Because ultimately, when there's peace, they're not needed. So the conflict has to remain in order for them to generate their income. And I really believe that's where intelligence can play a huge role as well. We have to vet these people. Why do we only vet our own people, but not others coming in?
That's a valid question, and that's one of the challenges that the African continent has. I'm going to deviate slightly from the program. I've got some online questions here. The first one is from Professor Glenn Segel. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Eeben, how do you suggest to overcome the inability to memorize, process, pass on large amounts of human-related information, in brackets overload, by the agent in the enemy camp in the African context, when constant communication is not available, e.g. load shedding? So how often will the intel be too little or too late?
I think that's one of the greatest challenges we have, and that's a great question. One of the things we have to put in place when we recruit an agent within the enemy camp is how we're going to communicate. And he's going to have several channels in which to communicate with us. Some of those channels, or one of those channels, is exclusively for use for critically urgent stuff. The other might be for logistics, in other words, something that he needs or he requires. The other might be for him to basically red flag himself and say that he's under suspicion. Now, obviously, we cannot give many of these guys cell phones or high-tech equipment, but all of these enemy camps, whether it be a government camp or a rebel camp, have people that work inside those camps. And we can use those people as couriers, in other words, to get that intelligence or intelligence information out to us. But I really think that goes about how do we plan our communication systems. Africa is a low-tech environment, and because of that, we cannot afford to give people high-tech equipment with which to communicate. So therefore, we have to resort back to the old system of tradecraft, but there are ways in which you can do that communication very, very quickly. We've been able to, in one instance, without compromising an operation, we're able to, within, I think it was 2.5 hours that a commander made a decision, an enemy commander, we had the intelligence. And before he could actually get his people to start moving, we were already in place waiting for him. And I need to say, I'm not an intelligence officer. I come from a very different field from intelligence. I just happen to have worked in it and to have met people who were able to help me overcome these communications issues with agents. And of course, going back to what the question was asked, we also have to bear in mind that we're going to have language errors. We're going to have people that speak different dialects. We're going to have people that are not able to memorize tons and tons of equipment. And that's why we have an urgent channel, a routine channel, and then several other channels as well. And once an agent is trained in that, he's very capable of actually sticking with those channels in order to communicate with us and us with him.
Thank you very much. There's another question from Dr. Thijs van der Berg. Apart from being apolitical, objective, ethical, and professional, how do you limit the challenge of politicization of military intelligence operations and officers by the policymaker? In other words, the interface, the policy intelligence interface. How do you address that?
When I saw Dr. Thijs van der Berg, I knew he was now going to be a trick question again. I think one of the things that we have, and it's a big problem in Africa, is that once the colonies collapsed and wars of liberation started or revolution started, the side that won brought a lot of their people into the armed forces and the intelligence services because they considered them to be loyal to them. And that's a very big problem, especially amongst the older officers in the African armies, that they still have that loyalty. And again, that's not a good or a bad thing. That's the loyalty. And I would rather have someone show me his loyalty towards an organization than not do it. Because if he's disloyal to them, he's going to be disloyal to me as well. But I have noticed amongst the younger guys that we train that it is very easy. And it is easy to convince them the importance of their role and that they are subservient to the state. And they actually accept that very quickly. Oftentimes, what happens is a policy will be made that's very political in nature, and it's then for the people who mentor these guys, say someone such as myself or someone else, or one of my guys or someone from a different group, to actually explain this disconnect between the policy and the reality on the ground. And usually, again, as that communication is open, we've never had a problem with it. So I don't foresee it as a problem, but if we do not address it, it will definitely become a problem. I don't know if that answers the question.
It's the issue of trust and agendas.
Absolutely, and narratives.
Yeah. And then I've got another question here from Toy. Hello, Eeben. I hope this is an appropriate question, which is interesting. How can we apply some of those principles in business?
I think if we go back to warfare, a lot of what we considered the principles of warfare actually came from the business environment. I'm talking of pre-World War I already. The military took a lot of those principles and adapted them to a more aggressive approach and a more forceful approach. I think when we look at the principles of intelligence, I think all of those are applicable to business, because currently businesses are fighting their own Cold War amongst one another. And unless companies and corporations understand how intelligence works, there are going to be big problems. And I'll give you a very simple example of that, if I may. Do I have time for that, Doc?
You're welcome.
And it's a very simple business example. A certain company had developed a new type of carpet. It sounds totally stupid. But their competitors wanted to know what they were doing. And their competitors hired someone to bug the boardroom, which we found out about. And we actually staged a boardroom meeting in there where all the wrong information was given, knowing that it's going to be picked up. In other words, we were giving disinformation. And the competitors struggled to get this thing working the way they wanted it to, or that they thought it should be. And that's just a simple example of how you can use intelligence against a competitor. And then, of course, it's a known fact that all major corporations gather intelligence on who they consider to be their competitors, whether it's in the defense industry, the mining industry, I wouldn't say the power generation industry, because there's nothing to spy on anymore, but it's very applicable to it. And I think we just need to look at those principles and actually almost reverse engineer them to suit our business model and what we are doing in business.
I would venture to say that's called business research, that context.
That's the pretty name for it, yeah.
The pretty game. Then I've got a hand raised here by, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Eeben Barlow. Well, welcome to your response.
Yes, you pronounced it correctly. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to attend such a seminar. My question is for Mr. Barlow. Of course, Mr. Barlow, you know that I have been a journalist for over 3 decades. And I'm afraid I'm going to drag you away from the core subject of the seminar. I'm going to drag you to my field, journalism, and more specifically, war journalism. You know as well that I've been working on a book about the commonalities between media, war journalism, media, military, and intelligence. Now, we all know that intelligence apparatuses, they have what they call, you know, it's a decent way of describing disinformation, the active measures departments. The active measure department's main concern is us, the media. Can you prescribe an antidote for people like me to fight or to fend off or to purify our media wells from that poison injected by those departments within these intelligence apparatuses?
Yeah, I think that's, first of all, a bloody good question, and secondly, a bloody difficult question to answer. I think the problem often that intelligence services have with the media and vice versa is a lack of trust. And I also think that the intelligence services or the armed forces want to give too much information to the media, and the media want more because they need to get people to know it. And I think one way in which that can be done is to actually work on rebuilding that trust. But you and I are actually going to be speaking to one another face-to-face in the not-too-distant future, I believe. And I think this is something that we should really investigate. You know that I'm always very concerned that the media can compromise something that's unfolding on the ground, number one, and therefore trust is required. But I'm also very well aware, and I've been a victim of it, of how the media can be used to smear and slander companies and the armed forces or law enforcement agencies, etc. And I think these are things we need to actually address and look at. And that's going to boil down to rebuilding trust that has been destroyed between both parties. And it's almost as though at times, and here I generalize, that there are people in the media who are desperate to, in their own way, make a name for themselves and publish absolute rubbish. And all that they do is they damage those very good journalists that are out there who want to use their craft to inform people. Because that's what the media does. It informs us. Because with that information we get, we can make informed decisions as people. So I think that's a situation of trust that needs to be rebuilt. And there are ways in which that trust can be rebuilt. And I think that this discussion actually calls for a whole hour and a half of us sitting, having coffee and smoking a cigarette. Because if we did that here on camera, we'd be politically incorrect and upset all the non-smoking people. And then we can actually discuss this, and I believe we can find a solution to it. But it has to be found, and I agree that the role that the media plays is critical because it's there to, we can use it to shape positive perceptions. And those positive perceptions, or whatever the perceptions are, become people's reality. So if the wrong perception is given, people's reality and their thought processes become very skewed. And we have to fix that, but we can. I believe we can, and I know that you've been working on this for a long time. So if you don't mind, you and I should sit and discuss this over a cup of coffee.
I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordaan. It's the Perception Monitoring Group that's also part of the FAD that you've mentioned in your book.
Yes.
And then I've got another online question here from Anne Moisan. That's now linked to the AI part, which is not dealt with specifically, but it is interesting, is how does AI assist partners in developing an agreed arrangement to share information. The question of AI and the HUMINT interface in sharing information, or I take it's to do with the distribution of information, the packaging and distribution thereof.
Yeah, I would think that that is at the level of the analysts. And then, of course, the intelligence product that's eventually developed using HUMINT and AI and that, and how the two are integrated. Maybe Dr. Mienie would be able to answer that better. But I would think that that ability or responsibility or decision is actually vested in the analysts themselves and not in the case officer per se or in the commander of the FAD.
Dr. Mienie, are you
Yes. Yes, I agree with you. Even it's at the level of the analyst, and it's only now recently that with the proliferation of AI, obviously the intelligence community is harnessing the, let's call it the horsepower of AI to assist the analysts to process the enormous mountains of collected intelligence information, because human capital, financial capital is limited, and we need assistance in analyzing the dearth of collected intelligence information. Especially if you have, the capabilities that we have here with a massive intelligence community consisting of 18 agencies, is an enormous amount that's being collected worldwide from 1 second to the next. So there's a role for AI as a processor of intelligence information that's collected. I think Dr. Reutener and I being in the classroom, how we actually spoke about that the other day, just on the academic level, how do we get our arms around governing, monitoring how students go about using AI in the classroom for their projects, for their written projects. That's another issue. We should keep in mind as well that an AI platform such as ChatGPT, what we get out of that is frozen information, if I can put it that way. It's information that's been inserted there by people. So it's nothing new. It's just accessing in a much quicker way that which is there already. Intuition, AI does not have intuition. So we've got to keep that in mind as well. I wonder if I could make use of the opportunity since I'm speaking now. Tace had raised this issue of politicization. Eeben, how do you go about inculcating an ethos of political neutrality by the military officer, the trainee, because because of the culture in Africa is such that there's subservientness or subservience to the authority, but we know that once we allow intelligence products to be politicized, trust goes out the window, and when you have another party in power, there's no trust in the intelligence community. So how, from your side, how do you ensure that the intelligence community is respected irrespective of which political party is in power? Is the one question. And then to yours, other question, Dr. Reutener, about the geopolitical situation, collaboration. We know from past cases where world leaders break down communication on a political level with one another, that their intelligence chiefs continue the communication behind the scenes. I think this is critical. I think this is critical for Africa as well, to maintain that kind of connectivity with outside intelligence community leaders as well. Are we addressing that, and how are we addressing that, Eeben?
Thank you, Dr. Mienie. Eeben, it's over to you.
So I couldn't even finish my smoke, Eddie. But okay, give me that. The first part was, how do we get this almost non-political view because of one party coming in and the other going out the window?
Yes.
I think, Eddie, if I go back to, and please remember, my book was based around the Focused Activities Division, which speaks to either a combat operations group commander or division commander, or even elements of it to a battle group. But at that level, I think the chief of the military intelligence division, whoever he or she might be, there should be an open door to not only the people in power, but also to opposition people. Because you want people to buy into the national security plan, if there is one, or the national security strategy. And I think those discussions must be held. But let me go back to, first of all, starting at grassroots level with the soldiers. They adapt very, very quickly to that. And believe me, they are told, you know, it's like these guys come from very different backgrounds. They come from very different language groups. They have different religions. They have different cultures. And we have to mold them into a unified group of men who are going, and women who are going to work for a common purpose. And that is why selection and vetting is critical. But that is easily achieved. And when I say easily achieved, I say that we can do it. We just need the right people. And that's what I've spoken about, having the right people, because it's a different mindset to your soldier. And just by the way, we do the same with the soldiers, because oftentimes what we find is, whether it be intelligence officers or soldiers, out of absolute frustration, they actually see the local people as the enemy as well. So, and that's when we start finding abuse of power and human rights abuses and that type of thing. These are guys, young men and women, and I use the term guys, that are going to go through the ranks and eventually get to senior positions. But we also have to start at the top and work down. And starting at the top, we have to have our Chief of Military Intelligence have an open door to not only the ruling party in government, but also to opposition parties, because everyone needs to buy into the national security of the state. Obviously, the discussion with the ruling party is going to be a bit different from that with the opposition party. If I can give you an example, for argument's sake, and this is just an example, there is a threat from a neighboring state against South Africa. It's picked up by the intelligence agencies and by military intelligence, in particular in terms of the military threat. The Chief of Military Intelligence must be able to discuss that with the government, because that's going to impact on the national strategy, the national security strategy, have an impact on the economy, on the people, on all sorts of things. But you also have to say to the leaders of the opposition that there is a threat building up and we are going to have to take action, because if we do not, the following are the implications for the nation. And I believe those discussions are very seldom held because of the way intelligence has become an abused tool in many instances. And by abusing intelligence, governments are actually shooting themselves in the foot, whereas they could actually be progressing a lot faster and a lot better. They're actually slowing themselves down, and we find this situation almost of inertia that happens. Intelligence isn't really working as intelligence should, because now it's being used to counter the opposition. We also have a different problem on this whole issue. And if I may go back to Mozambique, and the sudden appearance of Ansar al-Sunnah, which wasn't that sudden, because it was reported to the Mozambicans by us already in 2014 of what was coming. It was reported to the defense attaché. And we said to him that problems are coming, and we explained to him what those problems could be. We weren't exactly sure what they were. We were aware of weapons being moved across borders. We were aware of caches being laid. That discussion was then taken to one or two foreign governments who told them that we, in a nice way, are lying. Okay? And we sat back and we watched what happened. And that, I'll come back to again, us relying too much on foreign power intelligence. And again, it's not good or bad. It's whose interests are being served. But in that instance, credible intelligence was rejected in favor of agenda-driven intelligence. And I think there lies a problem. So this is not just a problem of politicizing. It's actually having that trust between the intelligence services and the state and the opposition parties. I mean, we look at our own country, when a new head of intelligence is appointed, every member of the opposition has his or her bad things to say about it, because all they want to do is criticize. But that person holds a key post in state. That person is actually responsible for ensuring the longevity and sovereignty of the state and its territory, in a way, because he or she gives the intelligence that allows the government to at least act preemptively and take action before the problem manifests itself. So it's not only at grassroots level we have to do it, we have to look at senior level and more open doors, and actually that we have to start speaking to opposing political voices as well, in order to make sure that the intelligence services are seen as a structure that's got integrity by all parties. And currently that isn't so, because they're used for other bits and pieces. That's the one question, and I hope that answers that question. But what was the second one again?
Collaboration with foreign intel agencies, where you have the leaders of, where there may be a breakdown in communication between leaders of different states, independent states, but where the intelligence leaders communicate with each other in the background. Are we fostering that? Are we aware of that?
We certainly are, and I will go to another example, if I may, and I think I've discussed it with you, and I won't mention the countries at play. There was a threat on a certain country. That country, the threat against that country could have had an impact on a third country as well, a regional country. We were asked to facilitate, as strange as this might sound, a meeting between the leader of the threat and the two governments. And we facilitated that meeting. And they were able to actually meet one another, discuss, why do we want to overthrow the government? Government would say, well, you know, this is what we can do to accommodate your belief that you are excluded or marginalized. The other regional government said, yes, if you do that, this is how we can help. So that lies and is critical. And unfortunately, we haven't nurtured that as we should have. We haven't got to a position where, when tension exists between two countries, my intelligence officer phones your intelligence officer, and they actually keep on the discussion, and both intelligence officers use what they can in order to redirect the tension and the anger away from true conflict or war.
Eeben, thank you very much. That links up to a different another question. Manu, I'm not going to ask you a question yet in context, but Manu has asked the question related to what you've just explained on the foreign policy of South Africa, how it strives to cooperate with African nations and the intelligence liaison and alliance formation. But I've got another question here from Albert Lee. Eeben, you have mentioned a need to move to a more aggressive means of gathering intelligence. How does the increasing pervasiveness and automation of surveillance affect the cultivation of assets or counterintelligence against adversaries attempting the same?
Okay, I'm now starting to get the difficult questions. I wish Telkom would intervene and cut me off. Okay, I think, first of all, if we look at a lot of the large cities, and I'm going to go to the last part or the last question, which I'll deal with first, we see the arrival of cameras on street corners. We know that there are certain abilities, electronic and otherwise, that are put in place in order to monitor people, etc. And this all goes back to part of what I said when we look at our doctrine is we assess and we appreciate, is to what does the environment, the operating environment look like that I'm going to have to find an agent. We can actually find a lot of that information that could pose a threat to us. We can find an open source information. Now, if I know that, for example, in the area where I live, and I'm talking of where I really live, there are some cameras around, and I can actually find that on open source information. I am not going to attempt to recruit someone or meet someone in that specific area where that can be done. And again, it goes back to one of those things on how do we train agents? Where are we going to meet? And that's part of his job and my job and people who we use as so-called support agents to advise us on new camera systems being put up, new interception devices being installed wherever, how are cell phone towers monitored, what radio frequencies are monitored, etc. That information comes also from agents. And that's why we use burner phones that we'll only use once and then dispose of it. And we will never use that phone or that SIM card again. And I know here in South Africa we have this thing called RICA, in which your SIM card is registered, and government wants to know, what SIM card are you using, what network provider are you using, etc. But I can go down to the parking lot, to a parking attendant, and ask him to get me a SIM card. And tomorrow I pick it up from him for 100 Rand, and I've got a clean SIM card that's never been used before. And I can go into any of these little second-hand shops and buy one of those old Nokia hand phones, put the SIM card in and make a call. So I think we see a lot of the technology being deployed as obstacles, but every obstacle has a way around it. There isn't an obstacle that cannot be breached, whether it's intelligence or military or political or any otherwise. Every obstacle is breachable. So I hope that answers the first part.
Now, the obstacle is actually an opportunity.
Absolutely. But now I forgot the first question.
So the first, that was the question. The first one was just on Marno's rebuttal on the question that he asked, but you've explained that already.
Okay.
And then I've got on the panel here, I've got from Professor Kleynhans. He would like also to ask you a question.
Even a bit more local, South Africa. To what extent did the closure of the South African commandos in the 2000s affect the collection of local tactical human intelligence? And can we relate or link this lack of human intelligence to the outbreak of the 2021 internal unrest in South Africa, at least from an early warning, proactive intelligence point of view?
Yeah, I believe that the disbanding of the commandos was a strategic error. Because the commandos fulfilled a role which was in many ways supplementary to the South African Police Service. They had eyes and ears on the ground. They were able to react. But I think we have to go back to something I mentioned earlier, and that is being reliant on foreign powers to give advice and to guide. And the shutdown of the commando units was on suggestion of a foreign power under the guise that this will pose a huge threat to government, which was an absolute lie, because the SADF, as it was pre-94, if it was a political army, wouldn't have allowed the transition to happen. I think if we go back to the commando system, by removing those eyes and ears and reaction off from the farms, I think it had a huge impact on food security and on farmers' livelihoods anyway. And this has actually created opportunities for criminal networks to act in a way in which they just feel they can. They can go and destroy crops or slaughter herds just senselessly. Whereas that wouldn't have happened had the commando system and its radios and its early warning structures and drills and SOPs actually been in place. And in fact, it would have been a huge asset to the South African police services now, had that still existed. And I think if we go back to the riots of, I think it was 2020 or 2021, which everyone spoke about, there were a lot of warning signs that those were coming. And in fact, even the media was advising on those warning signs. But no one tended to listen. And the damage that did to our international credibility and standing was immense. And I don't think people have yet realized how large that was. But the warning signs were there. And had the commandos been in place, and had anyone listened to them, I believe a huge amount of that damage that was done could have been prevented. But even more so, I believe the SAPS could have actually stopped it before it started. Because remember, the commandos were used as a force multiplier in terms of rural operations with the SAPS, setting up a vehicle checkpoints, doing cordon and searches and that type of thing. And we lost that capability. It was suddenly where a little police station in the middle of nowhere had 6 policemen in it. It had 300 commandos as well that it could call on. Now it doesn't have that.
Yeah.
So I think we accepted bad advice. We followed the bad advice. We shot ourselves through the foot. And this has had a huge impact on our farming community. And not only on that, on the price of foodstuffs. It's all gone up as well. And the farmers feel threatened. The farm workers feel threatened. And yeah, we're not only talking of so-called white farmers. Black farmers are suffering crime as well. And these systems that were there that are now gone could have played a massive role in preventing that.
Yeah. Eeben, thank you for that. And I've got a question that is now linked directly to your book. And that is what you refer to, the Trinity of Gravity. The Trinity of Gravity approach. How does the adoption of the Trinity of Gravity approach focusing on the enemy force, its financing and the local population enhance strategic planning and operational effectiveness compared to what we know as the traditional Clausewitzian center of gravity theory in the context? Because there's now a different take on the center of gravity from the Clausewitzian point of view in your context, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think when I never met Clausewitz, I might look that old, but I never actually sat down and spoke to him. But I think when he wrote that, he was referring to 2 armies drawing up to face one another on the field of battle. And the flag of that army, or your army and my army, symbolized where the command element was. And that if I took out the command element and took hold of your flag, in essence, I'd won the battle. Simplistically, that is how I understand Clausewitz to be. Realistically, and I don't know if this is applicable beyond our continent, but it certainly is applicable in the African context. There isn't a center of gravity. Unless we are looking at a revolutionary force establishing itself, or an anti-government force, and it's in the embryonic stages, and there's just a guy who started the idea and he's got 2 or 3 people that have joined his cause. We can then say he's the center of gravity at a very small level. But usually we wake up too late. And when we wake up, there's a whole force that's armed, that's got support, that has either manipulated or influenced the local population to support them. I believe that our wars should be focused on a trinity of gravity. And if we are able to neutralize 2 of them, the third will collapse. Allow me to illustrate this to you. In 1993, in the war in Angola between the Angolan armed forces and the UNITA forces, the discussion arose from the Angolan side, if we kill Savimbi, the war will end. Our view was, no, the war will not end. All you will do is you will make him a martyr. The best way to end the war is to cut off his funding, which came from the illegal diamond mining, up in the Lunda Norte province, in particular the diamond hub Kafumfu, which some of our white-collar companies later admitted to buying the diamonds from UNITA there and selling a kilogram of sugar for $20 or whatever, or 6 diamonds. But that essentially was the funds that kept UNITA going. So if we could cut that off, that was the funding part. He still had his force and he still had the local population. If in the process we could change the perception of the local population to become more neutral and even positive toward the government and especially the armed forces, UNITA will not have recruits. And then we could bleed him to death on the battlefield. He could not replace his lost men, his equipment, or anything like that. The same situation unfolded in Sierra Leone. So if we look at the trinity of gravity, all of these anti-government forces have money that comes into them. They have bank accounts. Money is moved transnationally, and it's happening as we're talking. And no one's looking at cutting that off. But that money is used to either buy influence, buy equipment, buy medical supplies, buy vehicles, and basically buy political goodwill. If we take those funds away and government starts exercising governance that is not inclusive or exclusive, you start changing the populace as well. And then people don't want to belong to this anti-government force. And the anti-government force has now lost its money. It's lost its source of people, because that's what it needs. Logistics, intelligence, communications, its so-called soldiers, etc. And then all you have left is a small armed element that is very easy to defeat. So I think when you look at the trinity of gravity, their responsibilities for the military, the police, and the intelligence services, finding where's the funding coming from and who's it going to, and stopping it, is the National Intelligence Service and the South African Police Service and institutions such as the Reserve Bank and the other banking systems in place. Now, I understand people will say, yes, but there are other ways to move money. Yes, there are. But that goes back to our intelligence people. They should be aware of these anti-government forces that are growing on the ground and already have recruited people within them. So let's, for argument's sake, say that we've closed down the enemy's money. He needs money to operate. When it comes to the people, who is really responsible for the people? And that is the government. Their greatest asset is the people. And in order to keep the people happy, they must practice good governance. And good governance, again, it's not something that's applied where certain people are marginalized and others are advantaged from it. It's to get all the people to support government plans. I mean, why do we find sabotage of national key points in the country? It's people showing frustration towards a lack of governance. So when those things are fixed, suddenly this force, the third part of the Trinity, becomes degraded, eroded, and weaker. And they are then very easy to sort out. And let me just say there something that I believe we sometimes miss the ball when we speak of terrorist groups, because terrorism is a tactic. And it's a tactic that's practiced by so-called insurgents or anti-government forces, etc. And I don't think we need to be looking at developing counter-terrorist strategies to take out a tactic. I think we need to be looking at how do we actually do things to make the opportunity less for those who want to overthrow government. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does.
Okay, so that's my trinity of gravity, with apologies to Clausewitz, but you and I never had this talk.
Thank you very much. We are running now out of time almost. I just want to give the floor back to Professor Solomon. If you have some final thoughts on these discussions.
Thank you very much. Actually, not so much final thoughts, but I think that Eeben Barlow has actually done us a huge service. You know, unlike, let's say, in the US or the UK, where you have people who've experienced things that he would write a book out there and put it out in the public domain. We in Africa don't have that tradition for various reasons. And I think that his book has actually filled a huge gap here, and I hope that others will also follow writing out these thoughts. And since we're doing this at the Faculty of Military Science, the Military Academy in Saldanha, you know, I think one of the issues is that post-94, strategic studies has actually died a slow and agonizing death in South Africa. You know, Dion Foury's outfit at UNISA was shut down. Mike Hoch's outfit at the University of Pretoria was shut down. And that only leaves the military academy. And I'm actually hoping that we revisit this as we watch the security environment in Africa actually worsen, for it to come back into universities and into curricula. And in that context, Eben's book will be most useful in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Solomon. I don't know, do you have any final context or things that you would like to share?
I don't, but if you want me to thank everybody, I can do that. But we
we are almost out of time. I just want to thank the panel. Eeben, thank you very much for a book, well written. And I will, as a lecturer here at the Academy, I will give it a strong thought to incorporate it, because it is absolutely necessary in my point of view. Dr. Mienie, from your side, thank you very much for assisting and joining us tonight. Today in your...
Yes, thank you very much. It was an honor to be part of this. Thank you for inviting me.
I really do appreciate it. And Professor, thank you for your inputs again. We really appreciate it. And the panel members that raised their hands and discussion, we could not get through all the questions, but hopefully most of them were answered satisfactorily. I'm now going to hand over to Professor Kleynhans for some final thoughts on our side.
Well, first of all, I would just like to say that we did record this. So I see there was a couple of questions about people wanting access to the talk. So please email Anri Dalport. She is my right-hand woman. Her email address is in the chat, and then she will be able to send along this seminar to you. But first of all, I need to thank our panel members. Thank you, Eeben, for a very insightful talk and for handling all of the questions that were thrown your way. Quick thinking, but well done for that. And then thank you to Professor Solomon as well, and to Dr. Mienie for joining us. We really appreciate it. This was the first shot on the ground as well for us. So we hope to replicate this going forward. And I see everybody seems to have enjoyed it as well in the chat. So we'll do it again, and hopefully not in the too distant future. We'll set up something else. And then I just need to thank my team as well for taking the initiative. Scientia Militaria is run by a small team of individuals here at the Faculty of Military Science. Myself as the editor, Henri Dalport as the co-editor, Evert Jordaan next to me is the book reviews editor at the moment, and then I think Marcel Reutener has now officially become our lead panel discussion online person. He's just been appointed in that role, but this wouldn't have been possible without them. So a lot of work behind the scenes, and even Yanni, our IT guy who disappeared. We appreciate all of you. So without further ado, everybody. Yes, sorry, Eeben.
I would just like to once again thank you guys for setting this up, and to Professor Hussein and Dr. Mienie for sacrificing their time. I know they are hectically busy. And obviously to the people who listen in and ask questions, thank you very, very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, everyone, and then have a good evening, and may you not have load shedding soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.